So today's question, we got to get right into it. We're short on time today, folks. Life happens. I think my phrasing of it, if you have a different phrasing, let me know. Is cultural appropriation appropriate? Question mark.
Yes,
What's
that is the question of the day that will be attempted to be answered by me, Andy Swindler.
and me, Brendan McNamara, today on Totally Classic.
Right.
So my first question wanted to is it a popular? I think for a while, cultural appropriation was kind of a buzzword, something that I think that frequently got kind of tossed around. I would say maybe not quite 10 years ago, but somewhere in that range, around 10 years ago. I do not see it referred to as much. Like it's kind of fallen slightly out of vogue as a inflammatory topic. It still comes up in headlines every once in a while, but it doesn't have the traction of so many other of the hot button issues that we've talked about, for example. Do you see it in your, so I was sort of just like, is this even a thing? I'd seen enough versions of it lately that I was like, hey, we should circle back to that. Is it a popular invocation anymore in your world? I'd say I see the phrase brought up, I'd say 3 times a year in my field of vision.
Oh my God, it's everywhere in woke culture.
Oh, okay.
And one of the things that occurred to me, there was kind of 3 main areas or entities or communities that struck me as where it's been one very mainstream, and then a couple less so.
Yeah.
But we can dive into that later. But yes, I would say I hear about it regularly based on the kinds of Instagram feeds that I follow. It's constantly like, for instance, actually, this wasn't even on my list, but yoga is one where I know a number of people. I think we've shared some of those.
Yeah, that's one specific account, Suzanne Bartaki, I think her name is, or whatever. She's like I'd say people I follow online, she brings it up like I would say almost constantly. So I include her as like one example because it's like her bailiwick. Then there's a Instagram page. They might have, I'm sure they have a page elsewhere called Impact. And I feel like they have talked about it at least once or twice over the past year. It's like kind of in there, but it's in their schematic, certainly, as it is sort of, I guess you would certainly describe them as, if nothing else, what is it, culturally woke, like cultural Christians, cultural new age, that sort of way. They certainly are sort of fit in that dynamic. Okay, so you still hear it. So it's still around. Okay, good. So our question is salient. How when you first sort of encountered the concept of cultural appropriation, how did you first encounter it? And then I'll say briefly that myself as an American, it was common, I would say for us, meaning I was in a bunch of classes where this concept was brought out. And I remember in high school, this was like literally an essay I wrote talking about is America a melting pot? Was like the question of I think that our generation maybe probably wrestled with quite a bit, where it's like, well, is it? And of course, my thesis at the time was like, well, it's more like a gumbo. Things don't really melt and dissolve. They sort of stay, but they're congealed in the stew of the way that we do it in America. So I'm speaking certainly from I would say in this whole episode, a very American POV, that things congeal with the way we do it here is the dash American. You just stick on whoever you are. You're a blah, 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 dash American. And so that becomes the congealing effect. We all sort of, and American doesn't even mean I think it has something to do with citizenry, but really has to do with whatever the ethos is, whatever the spirit of our foundational documents probably would exhibit it the best. We congeal around that, the idea of that which is worthy and elevation in the American spirit, American dream. But then everyone still keeps their aspects of their individual identity. So I come from a culture where cultural appropriation is the norm. That's literally how our culture functions. That you bring your culture here, it gets smashed up with ours. You take our stuff, we take your stuff. Everyone's kind of constantly borrowing. In some ways, culture is almost like the Indian giver concept. And I know that's probably a flashpoint phrase, but meaning that the way I was explained to me that the Indian giver concept came from the fact that in early colonial times that various native peoples had more communal property concepts So they were known for taking things. They would like give you a thing and they would be like, oh, the native gave me a gift. And then at some point, the native person would come and take the axe that they've given you and go and use it. And you'd be like, wait, why are you taking my stuff? You're an Indian giver, you're taking stuff back. And they were just like, no, I gave it to you. So now you're included in the group of people who can use this axe. You know what I mean? And certainly, it'll come back to you. You know, it's yours if we ride into battle or something. You know what I mean? But it's just like this is for all of us. And so I think obviously I come from, maybe even indigenously, I come from through that stream to cultural appropriation. So for me, it's a relatively new concept to consider. I'd say in the past 15 years of my life. But before that, I've never heard the term.
That's I'll have to look that up. I at some point convinced myself that Indian giver was about how we as colonists, or our ancestors as colonists, would give things to Indians and then take them back. So I'm actually really, really curious what the truth is there. We'll figure that out some other time. It's fascinating about the melting pot. I heard recently that at least in one circle, they were starting to call it the tossed salad for the same reasons. But it's a very different analogy or even image. Right? It's used to your point, the congealing. It's like, well, what kind of dressing does it have? Is it like really thick? Is it? But the same basic idea that like, no, it actually doesn't all melt together. You've got the original pieces, stuck in there.
Yeah, there's chunks. It's a chowder.
And one piece that came up as you were saying, the last part was something that often comes up, particularly when anti-racist work, Resmaa Menakem talks about this a lot. Does America have a culture? Like you said, like it's Dash America. It's, does America have a cuisine? And there are, like, that's a category of restaurant, right? Like American, whatever. And then that inevitably attaches completely to white people have culture, given that we were settled by lightly melanated Western Europeans for the most part. So, many people in those circles would say no, and that's part of the problem. And one thing I'll pose is just thinking about problems, maybe as a place to continue. I think the fundamental argument against it. Well, so first of all, I agree with you that it just happens naturally, and there's absolutely no way to stop it because we are social animals and we're constantly sharing, and we have all this biology about mimicry and sharing, and I mean all of this stuff. And it'd be, I don't know, I don't want to imagine a world where we're not sharing culture and exchanging and learning from each other and all of that. Like it seems dangerous. However, to me it attaches to power dynamics, and I think the danger of cultural appropriation, and this actually is the danger of the melting pot, and why that is kind of a horrible analogy, is the homogenization of everything, where just all just gets diluted, and colonization and power structures often lead to cultures being either eliminated materially or invisible, or at least invisibilized. So I think as I think about it, that's the primary argument against it, or that's the primary thing we're trying to point to. Whether or not every single example that's brought up it really falls within that, I don't know. Probably not, but some do, I think. And then I think something you often bring up, and maybe you want to pick up the ball here, is like, are the people actually in that culture the ones who are rendering this complaint? And often they are not.
Well, that is interesting. I do often feel like it's the way it's invoked. It's often a colonial represent in that just taking your dynamic as a boiler plate for the moment. It's a colonial representative telling other colonial representatives not to do this thing to the colonized, essentially, people. But I was introduced to this concept. Probably about 10, 15 years ago. And it came up very specifically through the food world. And I think that's actually, maybe that's even how, I'm sure it's not the only way, but it's certainly a dominant way that I've seen it referenced, which makes a lot of sense because sharing food culture, I think, is one of the tips of the spear of universal Congress. And one of the ways in which we all very easily appreciate each other. You know what I mean? We all love to eat. And we all love to like, oh, that's what you like. And I like that too. And oh my gosh, this tastes like, especially, we were just talking about this recently, Archie and I, that like meat or especially like meat or saucy something wrapped in a piece of bread and then sealed up, fried or grilled or steamed or boiled or whatever. Around the world, we've all figured that out. And that is like whenever you get to, I mean, you could do whole exploration just of that, of like pasties or empanadas or burritos or samosas or whatever. It's around the world that people figured that out and did that. And like, how cool is that? So then you can meet people you don't know anything about, and they go, well, we have one of those too. Like, and so you immediately have an affinity. I think food is like dance in that way, or music, you know what I mean? Someone can travel the world, with a banjo, which originally came from Africa, or it's probably, rooted in kora or other gourd-like instruments. And you can play music everywhere. You can kind of dance everywhere. You can eat everywhere. And it seems to be an area where we don't need to, we get happy about, because we don't need to fuss about generally. We're like, and it's also an honor to eat someone else's food. And it's an honor when they eat your food. And it's generally, I would say in most cultures, considered a little bit, it could be explained, but it's a little disrespectful if someone like literally is like offers you food to not at least take a bite, that it's like, it's almost like it's an end of diplomacy not to do so. But that's how I first sort of heard it. And I would say specifically, it was rooted in an examination of the career of a chef named Rick Bayless, who does like everyday Mexican. He is literally a chef who is white dude who is famous for like popularizing a wider understanding, even a regional understanding of Mexican cuisine. But he has made millions of dollars off of popularizing and writing Mexican cookbooks. And to people, especially in Los Angeles, some people were like, this is pretty messed up, that literally like you go, like the bougiest Mexican restaurant in Los Angeles is like, no, it wasn't exactly, but he had a restaurant there for a while called Red O, is like is a white dude. And a lot of people were like, we're working in the kitchen, we're making the food, he's making our food, and he's making more money. Like he's the number one earner, or the number one name in Mexican cuisine. Now, certainly to this audience, but generally, since the influence of American media plays a part in that, that it became like, well, hold on a second. Like, why does he get to come in and make all this money off, quote unquote, our stuff? Which brings commerce into it directly, which I think I would say, I don't know, it sort of talked offline. I was like, it would be nice to kind of find a line of like where cultural appropriation, which is, I think, does always occur and should always occur. And if it stops occurring, we're in a danger zone. I think if you don't appropriate a culture, in some ways, that's almost a disrespect for the culture. But I'm also an actor too. So to me, I'm an integrative human being. So, and that is my premise as to how human beings should be. We should constantly seek to understand we have something to learn from everybody, and there's something worth borrowing, stealing, whatever. And especially as an artist, right? Great artists, what is it? Good artists borrow, great artists steal. So it's like, this is our gig. And as an artist, I'm actually more related to people who invent things than people who just grew up eating things. So then I have the artist twist on this as well, which is the person, like, and I jump away from food for a second, but like this came up to me in the rave world. This is the sort of second big cultural appropriation flashpoint I recall, again, like 15 years ago, when people at raves, it was pretty popular to wear like native headdresses, like chieftain headdresses, like big ones with tons of feathers. And then it became all of a sudden, literally people sent out, like a bunch of raves sent out things asking people to stop wearing them because it was inappropriate cultural appropriation or whatever. My, of course, immediate reaction is, no, I didn't wear them. But my immediate reaction was like, oh, now I want to buy one. Because it's a bunch of feathers from a bird, which means the people who invented the headdress culturally appropriated that from flipping birds. So the bird actually owns it. So let's talk to birds. You don't get to be, as an intermediary, get to decide, well, we're the one who first put it on our head in this way. Secondly, someone made that up. One person, most likely, maybe a small community, highly unlikely, maybe a small group of 2 to 5 people, just knowing how things are created generally in human beings. So that means one person made it up, and then a bunch of people took his or her invention and then just started doing it. And so you don't, if I make a movie and people start adopting, or let's say this is a great example, the Coen brothers made The Big Lebowski. People do the Lebowski Fest, it becomes part of their life, you know what I mean? They're like, they feel like they own it. but they can do all sorts of things with it. You can culturally appropriate the world of the Big Lebowski at Lebowski Fest and live in the world of the dude for a week or weekend or whatever, maybe your whole life, whatever. That just live your life, do it. But the Coen brothers made that, and no one who's related to the Coens, like who's just has the last name Coen, or grew up next door to the Coens, or saw the movie 72 times, or watched it every year with their family, they don't own that. The Coen brothers and the entire film crew, everyone who made that, it's really theirs, or the film companies, whatever, it's IP. And so ultimately culture is a way of life. And so the adaptive part, I think we both feel like we have to do some version of it. But I was, especially as an artist, and nobody ever talks about that. So it always drives me crazy.
Oh, there's a lot there. I like the piece you mentioned about that many cultures end up inevitably creating similar things.
Yeah.
Ostensibly independently,
Yeah.
which is, and then that could be really amazing when they come together and they're like, oh my God, this is what we did. And I think that's beautiful. Bayless is a good example. I didn't think of that, and I think that really speaks to my generally using like the word power. The question emerges, would a Mexican chef have had access to the funding, to the publicity, to the whatever? And I'm gonna say probably not.
Yeah.
So that I think that's where I would come in there. The last piece, I don't actually love like patents and copyrights. I think they're abused a lot. You've got major corporations just sitting on patents and not even using them, and so there's so in a weird way, the way you were just describing it kind of connects to that, where we're like guarding our culture. The patent is kind of like a way to guard intellectual property or culture. There's a system I've liked for years called the Creative Commons, which I think has really created a beautiful in between, right? Where it's like I'm gonna the Creative Commons to me is like I don't know, maybe the answer to a lot of this, just the way that philosophy, the way not only as a philosophy but as a very tangible, like legal and formal framework, where you put this label and this attribution on a piece of intellectual property, usually like a website or like an image, and it says, I want to share this. I want you to use what I have, and I want attribution. And maybe that's just my ego. Maybe that's just, to me, that's so beautiful, because then, and there's even very specific nuances. Like you can say, well, attribute, it's shareable with attribution, or it's shareable with attribution, and you can alter it. Like you can be very specific. With how, and I'm actually thinking about that a lot right now, because I'm a photographer, and most of my photography has never seen the light of day. And I'm like that. I'm like, I'd like to just put it out there in some kind of Creative Commons format, so that people can use it and enjoy it and do what they want with it. Because I'm not, I don't know, I'm not, whatever, trying to make a lot of money on it. And so that's a couple things. And then back to kind of the, you mentioned raves. So there's two that I want to bring up. One is the like NFL teams, I think is a very mainstream where this has shown up, just in like the names. I don't know, the Redskins, the Chiefs, like in the logos. I haven't checked in on that in a while. I think one of them changed their name. I can't remember.
I think the Redskins is like they're the Generals or something now. Which actually seems tone deaf. It's like of all the things you're gonna pick. Yeah. You're going a military term after. I was like, it seems like you're trolling. That seems like a we're gonna.
That really does.
It does. Yeah.
Oh well, the people who killed the Redskins. Sure, that's great.
Well done.
So interesting. But then I'll come back to one that's very close to both of our hearts, which is Burning Man. Which obviously related to raves. I remember writing in a journal that Burning Man was like a combination of rave and hippie culture, and that's probably still pretty consistently called out for appropriation. It just like you said, maybe it's the headdress. One of the weird things, back to your movie reference, is like, well, if it's the main thing it's probably appropriating is like a Mad Max culture, and I don't even know who wrote Mad Max. So,
I know. Did George Miller himself write it? I don't know. That's a good question.
So I'll put the ball back there.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting thing to approach. And so I guess my feeling is, I would say 95% of the time when I see an accusation of cultural appropriation, I think one of the things that brought this up again was Gwen Stefani just said, "I'm Japanese." She was like, "I grew up in Japanese. She's like, I'm
That was
Hispanic.
pretty recently.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, this is pretty recent.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she said things like that over time or whatever. She's like, I'm Japanese, I'm American, I'm Hispanic, Latino. Like I grew up in all those like that's all me. I grew up like immersed to some degree in all those cultures, and those are who I am. So she just said it. And of course, that I was like, oh, I haven't seen an information about cultural appropriation in a while. But people were like, did she just say that out loud that she's Japanese? Is she? And then people were like, wait, is she? I better like look into her family tree. And then there was articles in Japan, like interviewing people in Japan, and they were like, oh, we loved it. She loves our culture. They were like, they were hilariously insular. I mean, historically, like Japan was one of the most insular cultures, I would say, I mean, potentially in human history, like till very, very late. And then hilariously, once they started appropriating other cultures, they overtook a phenomenal number of them and became, went from being like kind of almost a somewhat backwards nation technologically to being like a technological leader in like 2 or 3 generations. So big ups Japan. It's a fascinating place. But they don't have the same concept there, really. So it was funny to see kind of the thing you were talking about. A lot of cultural appropriation accusations seem to be from gatekeepers. The first conversation I had on this topic, like intensely, was with a chef of a restaurant in LA called Galaguetza. I did an episode of a podcast I used to do called Pass the Salt. We sort of talked through, is cultural appropriation a real thing? And she was adamant to a degree that I think would be interesting to outside folks, that she's like, she cooks Oaxacan food. And she was just like, if chefs from anywhere, she's like, even a chef from Mexico City, like if you say you're making Oaxacan food and you've never even eaten a Oaxacan meal, you haven't gone and like seen how mothers cook Oaxacan food, if you don't know, like if you're using this chili instead of that chili, like, and you're calling it that, she's like, there's nothing okay about that. She's like, I see chefs in the US do that. I see chefs in Mexico do that. So cultural appropriation certainly can get, I mean, to me, that seems very granular because I'm not from Mexico, but then that's like, because that's like people from Kentucky being like, telling people in Oregon, don't say you do that like we do, kind of thing. But I think largely is a concept that comes outside of the culture. And then B, is something that if commerce is not involved at all, I'm just trying to sketch out, it's still blurry. I'm trying to sketch out my line. Like if commerce is not involved in terms of like, you are directly profiting from it, like in a concrete fashion, then I feel like we shouldn't even start the conversation. So if people just do it, like if now you could be like, well, someone sold that headdress to that person, so that's commerce at an independent level. I was like, all right, well, man-to-man commerce, that doesn't feel like the Bayless thing. I thought was a great example because here he's published 12, 14 cookbooks on Mexican cuisine. In doing so, has drawn attention to Mexican cuisine as something complex and richer than tacos, and so has helped expose in some ways, you could look at it as like, he was the white explorer exploring for white people an entire culture to be like, hey, there's so much here that we don't know. There's so much here we've missed. So in some ways, you're like, that's exactly what you want, right? You want an explorer and an emissary to like a translator, essentially, to be like, oh, okay, hey, white people, it's really cool over here. It's really complicated. It's not just refried beans. And actually making refried beans is really difficult. Or, you know what I mean? Like, so I think it's actually a really fascinating area to examine because it's an absolute necessity. And I think there's a scramble, and there has been for a decade or more, to gatekeep in ways that I think need to be worked out on an individual level.
I wonder, your lovely wife, Auntie, is a well-known chef. And I assume she's at a level where she has been criticized for everything. And
Yes.
but I wonder if like it has come up that, I know her original mission was something like, making Indian cooking more accessible for Americans, which
absolutely.
Having, not being much of a cook myself, having cooked a couple of her things, I really appreciate, because I'm like, this is cool. Like, I would like to learn more about this. And she has an amazing way to teach us about the cuisine and tell the stories and talk about the spices and so I don't know, has that come up either, I don't know, just for your personally conversations or the things you've seen online or anything like that?
It has. She gets put, in terms of anything related to this, she gets pushback from Indian people, not a lot, but some, in terms of basically why, like, this isn't how we do things kind of thing. Like, so in some ways, I think missing the whole point, which is like, I'm trying to, this is literally trying to fuse. I literally said American and Indian, I'm trying to fix these two together. And I would say, as someone with an adventurous palate, I'll take one bite of pretty much anything someone puts on a plate in front of me that is food. And or even that's not food. I don't know. There's a phenomenal amount of sawdust in some of our food in the United States. So even non-food.
As long as it doesn't touch your fingers, right? Is that still?
Yeah, exactly. Just don't make me touch it off temperature. I'll eat a live squid, whatever people do that, right? Or a live octopus, I'll do it. But there are tastes, though, flavors in the Indian, which is a huge term, but like in the Indian flavor profile, food-wise, where I put it in your mouth and you go, it is foreign. It is straight up foreign. There are flavors here I've never tasted, even though they'll be very familiar because they're used in, whatever, 46 common dishes, throughout the continent, just throughout the country. So in some ways, I thought it was a great thing because I was like, people need that. People need translation cross-culturally. Just don't always. Some people are different than others, but there are people who are fearful. There are people who kind of need a bridge. So in some ways, cultural appropriation to me is awesome because but this is another thing maybe to help draw the line. Where is it inappropriate? Where is it inappropriate? Is this about bridge building or bridge burning? So is it about reaching across and being like, I'm wearing this at this rave because I think it looks flipping awesome, and I saw some dude dancing with this at a powwow, which seems a lot like a rave from the outside, or a rave is a lot like a powwow. Let's put them in sequence, appropriate sequence. Historically. So then, like, why wouldn't they dance in this? It looks awesome. I want to dance in this because it looks awesome,
Yeah, and you brought up one word from the food world. I think that's important. Fusion, right? I mean, there's so many chefs like doing fusions of different cultures, which are like amazing.
Yeah.
Like it's like, oh my God, like who thought of putting these ideas together or these flavors together? And actually your last piece about bridge building, that leads me to another community that's really close to my heart. And I know a little bit more, I would say, even than Burning Man, about how this has played out pretty recently, actually, with the Mankind Project that I've been a part of now for 4.5 years. It's a men's group, really, I think, rooted, at least in terms of the psychology of it and the sort of community and the bondingness of it, is really amazing, and has been a huge anchor in my life and my healing journey. And it's gotten a lot of very direct criticism about appropriation. The whole thing starts with like a 48-hour weekend. You go you arrive on a Friday, and it's funny, like there's some secrecy about this, because there's elements to it where you just sort of surrender and give yourself over. So I don't know, like until now, I probably wouldn't have sort of mentioned much of this publicly, to the extent anybody listens here. We know you're out there. We love you. But I will mention a few things because they're going away. So there's been a massive shakeup. There was at least one indigenous group, American Indian group, and I'm forgetting exactly which First Nation. It might have been Lakota, but one of the weird things here is that there was a Lakota elder. The story I heard for one of the ceremonies in that weekend was like a sweat ceremony, and we were even told not to call it a sweat lodge because the sweat lodge is a very specific ritual, and so, but it was a sweat ceremony, and the story was that a Lakota elder had gifted it to Mankind Project, and I don't know, I thought, well, that kind of makes sense, because I've heard, at least anecdotally in other areas, that indigenous elders are actually gifting some of the medicine to, thinking, I don't know, it's pretty paternalistic, but it's like thinking, the Westerners are just kind of these renegade children running around, and it's like, well, what do you do with renegade children? Just punish them and smack them around, or do you actually offer them, some kind of like advice and guidance, if you are truly the elder? So I think that's maybe an interesting question for another day. But So, but then in this one website, which I could probably find again, it really lists the grievances for Mankind Project, specifically from one of the First Nations. And then it even mentions this. It's like, oh, and that guy that he was like this rogue or renegade, like I don't know, it called him out for, just being like, yeah, he did that, but he didn't speak for us. And he wasn't really, so even within that, you're like, oh, who the hell has the permission, right, within any group to carry it on or to pass it on or to gift it or to whatever. So that's fascinating. But some of the other specific examples are, there's like a direction ceremony. I don't think that's quite the right name, but it's like, you look to the north and you sort of call in the energy of the north, and you look to the east and you call in the energy of the east. And to my knowledge, that's going away. I actually attended a call like two weeks ago where they were like outlining, like, here are all the things we're changing. And it is massive, and it is not well received across the board, because this community's been around since the mid 80s and like doing this very consistently, and probably 70,000 men have gone through this. So that in of itself begs this huge question, like, well, is that a culture? Like, when does that potentially become its own culture? And I'm not defending all of it. I do think there's appropriation here. I mean, one of the things, I'm now in a small group that once the groups are launched, they can be pretty much function independently. And one of the things we'll be in a circle, on Zoom or in person, and pretty much after speaking, we'll say aho. And that I do believe is pretty specifically just stolen, from that's a piece of language that's borrowed or even stolen from American Indian culture. So that's going away. And they were saying like, well, we could, and I've heard that argument in other places, like, well, what do we do? Like, what is a nice way to say I'm complete and just offer gratitude? And it was funny because they were just like, we're still tinkering with that, but we might just go with like, thank you. It's like, okay, cool. Like, I don't know, whatever. So that one's interesting. We also have a practice of using animal names. And there's a whole piece around that. We still, in my small group, use animal names. So I'll be considering, that. Although it's funny, one of the guys who's definitely not in like woke culture, that's not the reason he did it. But at some point he threw out his animal names and he's like, well, my animal name is I'm a human being.
That's my animal. Yeah. My animal is me.
So I think those are just a few examples. One of to bring it back to your point about capitalism or commerce, like, I thought one of the kind of ridiculous claims of this particular group was that, they thought they were just kind of propping Mankind Project up as some like huge, I don't know, money-making capitalist organization. And it's like, it's a nonprofit. I happen to know they're probably underfunded or barely funded. The weekends are nominally priced just to kind of cover the basic expenses. It's mostly volunteer run. So I think that's a distraction in this particular case. Like, let's as is often your point of view, like, let's actually stick to the real arguments, because they are there. Like, there are, I think, some pieces that were more than borrowed and sort of ritualized. So I think that's a part of the problem, is like, in that environment, it feels like, I don't know, it really feels like we're attempting to do these rituals in a way that's probably really quite superficial. And in that case, I want to honor, one thing I always want to honor, and maybe the guiding light of this is, if we're going to learn another piece of culture, let's really learn it, right? Let's really immerse ourselves in it. Let's ideally like hang out with the elders of that culture for a long enough period of time to embody it, and there's a sacredness there. So I do think that's something that was missing. It all just felt kind of like somebody had sort of skimmed through the manual and then recreated it, rather than really deeply immersed in it.
Well, it's funny because I'm a Christian, and the funny thing is I see people emulating church, certainly for profit, right? And emulating spiritual activity, prayer, amen. You can say amen is like a, it's whatever. It's at least a distant kindred to aho. And depending on the culture, that's the thing you can just say when someone says something true. For a while, people were slanging it as church, just say church. And so I think it's funny to me. I was like, why that specific? I think this is one thing I keep seeing. It seems very centralized around again, the thing you said, this sort of the perception of oppressed people's cultures, that since we tried to take them away from them to destroy them, that now maybe using them at all is another version of taking them away. Except the thing is when you emulate a culture, you take nothing away from it. Like if someone has like a pagan church service or like a whatever, there's a church in Reverend Michael Beckwith, he calls himself Reverend of some sort. Beckwith, I can't remember the name of the church in LA. It's a huge church, right? And it's basically church, but with no churchy in it. Like it is absolutely a culturally appropriated. They've taken from the Christian culture, like, and even well, no, not Judeo-Christian, even in this case Christian, like Christian culture, and they're doing like a straight up version of that, but with no Christian-y stuff. You know what I mean? So it's like a completely appropriated thing, but at the same time, I'm like, why does no one care about that? And I think I've had that question, and actually in some ways I've already answered it in this concept. But okay, so this draws me, this is almost like a leap into we don't always have time to deeply learn every culture that we're going to appropriate. Like when I eat spaghetti and meatballs, I love spaghetti and meatballs. I almost think of that as like a little bit like an American thing, you know, because it's an Italian and Chinese fusion, but it is really more rooted in Italy, who culturally appropriated noodles from China. So how cool is that? You know, so I live in a culture that's based on appropriation. But I think it's fascinating. The power dynamic thing just seems so inconsistent in terms of people who find cultural appropriation offensive or a thing they need to address. And so I think that's where I constantly run into the deepest confusion on this issue, is that there are groups of people who seem especially irritated about it, and they don't seem irritated about it in terms of the dynamic we're trying to figure out. Like, well, what if you haven't immersed yourself and sort of in some way gained permission, like kind of gained your way to permission from said culture that you're borrowing from, especially if it's a culture that has been oppressed as compared to you, and now of course this is accepting that identity elements are in any way relevant to ourselves, but just theoretically let's hold that for a moment. Because, for example, I was like, I don't see, like, where is the umbrage for like drag shows, right? So in many ways, like a drag show is our modern minstrel show. Dressing in drag is kind of our modern day blackface. And no one seems to have a problem with it. Like it's a clear, parodic emulation of feminine performance by men who, in the oppressing dynamic, are absolutely above women in the sort of hierarchy of power throughout the ages. And really looking at the subjugation of people groups, women as a subjugated people group is, I mean, women and children probably are like one of the most long dominated, like consistent. They've always been in the top 5. You know what I mean? Maybe they won some years, lost some years, but they've always been in the top 5 of like most, like, why are we treating people like this groups? So I think it's fascinating that on one hand, there's this, especially I think with native things, and I think a lot of it just comes from guilt personally, of just like, oh, these people were treated really crappily. I don't want to be a person that treats them crappily, because they might associate me with other people that treated them crappily just because I might look like them, which is not appropriate, by the way. It's an inappropriate assumption on if that was the case. So then you're sort of responding to an unrealistic accusation, but it does come, I think, from an instinct to not do the wrong thing, which is a great instinct. You know what I mean? But I don't know, that inconsistency more than anything makes me think it's just not, I was like, oh, this is just not a real thing. But that's a little bit of a knee, I'm saying that out loud because that's a knee-jerk thing on my part. And I especially because drag shows have been like in the news a ton the past like year or so, that I was like, it's fascinating to me, like, why I don't understand, like, and I see literally the same groups, like let's say Impact or whatever, talking about both in completely different ways, but that's the same dynamic, like definitively same dynamic. And I would even say drag is worse, because drag is like a minstrel show. You're literally performing an exaggerated, often comedic, often body, like it's meant to be laughed at most of the time. Some drag is serious, but I would say most drag shows I've been to, which is whatever, a handful, Joy or like laughter is pretty much part of it. Even if the performances might be serious, usually the host or MC or whatever is like cracking jokes. Like they're kind of the clown at the circus. You know what I mean? Like bringing levity, and then someone come out to a serious dance or whatever, serious performance, like performance art performance. But yeah, but it's like it is very minstrel show like, and it's something we all can go, ha, 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 ha. Oh, isn't that funny? You know, and it's so yeah. I don't know. That's just there's a dissonance there, especially in terms of amount of appropriation that's occurring. Like, you know what I mean? Like Mankind Project might be appropriating Lakota rituals in a pretty small thing, but I don't think that's wildly popular. And so I was like, why is a bigger version of it kind of appropriate and that one's inappropriate? And literally the same people are like, this one's great, this one's terrible. So then I was like, and then it makes me confused.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I have the DVD for Priscilla, Queen of the Desert in the next room.
How good is that? That movie, how fantastic is that movie?
Oh my God.
Heartbreaking, heartbreaking, hilarious.
It's got all of it and beautiful. Oh my God, so beautiful.
Gorgeous.
I wonder there's an intersection there that comes up somewhat often. You know, I imagine a lot of folks who are performing in drag shows are gay men, particularly gay white men. And that's an intersection of power that is often sort of called out as really dangerous, because there's this sense of marginalization, which is real. Obviously, I from my point of view, gay people have been marginalized, and they still carry a lot of the power of the white male generally. And you and I don't know, maybe, but there's nuances there in other episodes that we don't. Oh yeah, I forgot we don't use the word nuance. Do we do the Pee Wee Playhouse thing? And so that's what pops into my mind is like, to your point of like, oh, isn't this maybe contradictory that this isn't called out more in this category? Particularly if they are white men, gay or not. You know, performing in this way. Yeah, I don't know. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's a neat thing, and I wanted to drop that as just like a good, like, it feels like a good pull quote. And it really occurred to me. I have a couple of minstrel show records on my shelf, you know, and especially consider how popular drag is now. Like RuPaul's Drag Race won like best reality show at the Emmys, like what was like 6. I mean, they were like the Amazing Race. They won like 6 years in a row. So it's like, it's mainstream entertainment.
Yeah.
Kids go, grandmas go, brunch, bingo. You know what I mean? It's like a hugely popular thing. And I was like, this is so similar. Like, this is crazy. Especially we get this thing, you know, people are like, whatever, the accusations of turf and all that sort of stuff. I was like, oh, this is like a cultural appropriation happening right in front of us, hugely popular. And again, no one seems to care. So I was like, this is the whole thing. I was like, I don't know if anyone, this is why we should talk about it. I don't think anyone has any sort of metric by which they make the accusation, because then consistently they'd have to apply that metric. And it's not like we did either, but we at least got close. You know what I mean? I think commerce starts to get you close. This commerce might have something to do with it. Building bridges, I think, might have something to do with it. Intentionality, and you were talking about exploration, understanding, like actually having some comprehension, or at the very least, if people to not be bracingly like, shut up, I'm gonna wear what I want. Just listen when someone's like, actually, you know, in my culture, we don't wear that unless we're married or whatever. You know what I mean? Put a bindi on your head in a particular way, and it's like, oh, that actually means you're married, a married woman. And be like, oh, I just thought it looked cool, like smudgy. And they're like, oh, well, just so you know. And you wouldn't be like, F you. You'd be like, oh, okay. And then you have to ponder, okay, well, in yourself, ethically, you have to all of a sudden, you have to weigh that information and not dismiss. I don't think you should really dismiss anybody's accusations out of hand, which I see happening kind of a bit, that people just eye roll about this stuff.
Oh, I might owe Artie an apology. I remember when she was the first time I saw her wear a bindi, I called it a binky, and it was kind of relentless about that, and she offered me a lot of grace, but I don't know if that was offensive to her.
A binky? No, it's funny because a binky is like a little comfort thing. I mean, all culture ultimately is comfort, and that's another aspect. That's a psychological aspect. If people see you taking their culture, they feel like somehow you've taken it from them. You've taken their binky, and but my culture gives me comfort.
Yeah, and again, going back to the power dynamics and colonization, it's like, well, in some cases, it's quite quite literally that in the process of destroying that, I mean, it's like the Borg from Star Trek. It's like, well, it's basically
Yes.
we're a similar.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good just word, right? If the culture is being assimilated,
Yeah.
which inevitably means the original peoples are being essentially no longer recognizable, and in some cases that's just like horrendous, right? Like like what were they called? Like the schools where they would bring American Indian children and just completely like erase, every trace of their language and their haircuts and cultural heritage and all the things, quite violently. That's a kind of assimilation, a violent assimilation.
Forced. Yeah.
And in that, you might argue, I don't know. I'm guessing a lot of the people weren't actually bringing on that culture. They were more interested in destroying that culture than sort of borrowing from it or appropriating it.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think maybe that's an obvious distinction, but it's worth naming. If it's assimilation in that way and destroying the culture actively, that's inappropriate. I'm going to answer that part of the question.
Yes, I'd say we had to be very judicious in our application of destruction of ways of life. Although there are some that we should destroy. But I would say, many times throughout human history, that has been done to, what I would say one of the distinctly, one of the most evil manifestations of human desire.
And as we've mentioned a few times in this episode, it is also on the other end of that spectrum quite natural and quite healthy, quite human to share culture, to share ideas. And so that word share feels quite important, because that to me that implies that it's not sort of one culture with more power kind of picking and choosing and diluting it. It's like we're going to get together and sort of, like you said, like, oh wow, that you make a burrito, like we made something kind of similar. Cool. You want to try ours? That feels pretty healthy. And then they go back and they're like, hey, we just learned about this thing called a burrito. We want to show that to you and bring it. And inevitably then it's like the game of telephone. It's going to change. It's going to kind of mutate and evolve within that culture. And like the gumbo, it's going to get congealed.
It's going to congeal. Well, and this might be a fear too, the comfort. And then also that's how, I can see someone saying this now, that's how it starts. It starts with the building bridges and sharing food and sounds real nice. And it's your Thanksgiving meal. It ends in genocide. So Rabers wearing headdresses sounds real fine, blah, 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 blah. Next thing you know, we're all dead. And even that might be, it might be irrational in presentation. It's not irrational in terms of like repetitions of history. So anyway, I just want to shout that out, that I acknowledge those defensive by virtue of learned experience responses.
Yeah, clearly that has happened, continues to happen.
Yeah,
I'm thinking about museums. I think museums came up in one of our just how many cultural artifacts, which is sort of cataloged and numbered in the basement of some probably English or American or Western museum. And then I think I had another thought. Go ahead.
Those can often look, I think it's amazing, and some cultures are prioritize preservation more than other cultures, in which case you have to have those arguments. Like some cultures care about preserving things meticulously, and other cultures they're like, what do you mean? That was yesterday. Like tomorrow is tomorrow, today is today. Live in the now, man. Cut it out. So then in some ways you're like, oh, there's great benefit to both, right? Especially things that have been saved from like war-torn areas. You think of places like Afghanistan or whatever. Like anybody who stole stuff from Afghanistan, before the Russians invaded, then you'd be like, oh, in some ways that'd be great because at least it's around now. But in some ways you're also like, yeah, but this is a question too, like when you've actually stolen something, when do you give it back? And who owns it? Because especially if it's an old thing, nobody owns that.
That's a very active conversation, and some museums are actually attempting to sort that out right now. And there was a clip, I think it was actually on John Oliver did a pretty good segment on the museums, and there was a clip of watching some indigenous, I think they were American Indian elders walking through a museum and looking at these sacred objects on the shelf. And and I'm just starting to understand this, but
Yeah.
I referenced the book Sand Talk before, written by an Aboriginal man, and the way some cultures think about objects, or the relationship they have with objects, is wildly different than us. Like they didn't.
Yeah.
That was their written language. It was. And he talks about every chapter. He's like, for this chapter, I didn't write down like an outline like I would as a writer, right? He's like, I made a boomerang with all these like carvings in it, and like that's this sacred ritual to yarn, as he would say, or to even divine the energy of this piece, and then from there translate to English, which is actually rather challenging given the massive cultural differences. But I just remember that clip really stood out to me because there was just so much sadness of, I think I'm projecting a bit maybe, or I don't know if he said this, or if they did, but it just felt like they were looking at like their dead ancestors, just like on the shelf, being tagged and numbered,
turned into just and fully objectified. Well, that's an interesting. I wonder if that's culturally. You've said the word sacred a bunch of times, and I wonder if that's something too of culturally we are shifting. I feel like in the past time, and this is both good and bad, towards a re-examination of what sacred is, whereas prior to in the past couple of decades, it hasn't been as widespread. Whereas nothing is sacred, literally nothing. So it's like, oh, they're sacred objects. I mean, your immediate question has to be, who says it's sacred? Prove it. You can't really prove the sanctity of something. So it's a completely subjective claim. So you would understand why someone would be like, you're talking nonsense. That's like me being like, oh, please don't step on this Bible. It's sacred. And be like, okay, if it hurts your feelings, I'm not trying to hurt your feelings, but it's flipping pages and plastic. You know what I mean? Like, is it? And then what is sacred? Like, does sacred mean something I just really like a lot, in which case that's not as nearly as relevant a claim as sacred, meaning if something has like echoes of eternity. And then if it's your system of, is my notebook sacred? And then because I think we're confused as a culture too. We're kind of in the zone of like, is everything sacred? Is it like nothing is good or evil except thinking makes it so? Nothing is sacred or profane except thinking makes it so? And I think we are sort of in an adolescence in that way, where we're like, I don't know. And so in some way, I think like with your Mankind project, I think they've absolutely made the wrong decision. Like, just it'll be damaging to themselves as a unit and themselves as a coordinate ethical organization to have just like abolished things based on someone else's premise, when I'm assuming so much of that is really understanding yourself in the context of community, but also understanding yourself, and that someone's accusations against you, even claims, like, why would you give someone else's claims about you higher authority than that which you know within yourself? But again, there's this yearning. This is also too, it's this constant yearning for this, like a father to rule us. This is why Succession and Yellowstone, my thesis, those are like the biggest shows of the time. We want people to boss us around. And I think to a lot of people, they find that in indigenous cultures. They're like, oh, those are the old ones. Those are our elders. Those are our wise ones. We kind of want you to boss us around. That's another thing that I think is somewhat at play. Whereas I think prior, even in the 80s, especially growing up, it was far more anti-hero, rebellious, like profane, like, I'll piss in a church. I don't care. What are you talking about? Who cares? This isn't real. You're like, oh, my ancestors are here. No, they're not, man. That's a piece of plastic. You know what I mean? But maybe they are. And I think we're opening our minds to be like, oh, wait, what if we're wrong? What if way more things are sacred than we think are sacred, And I'm glad we're asking those questions.
I think they're very good questions to ask. And the context, it's all about context. It's sacred. For an object to be sacred, it must, I tend to believe in energy as something that exists without context. So yes, I believe somebody sensitive to energy could pick up an object and sort of feel something about it. But there's almost no way they're gonna actually accurately sort of understand the entire cultural dynamic of why and how that was created.
Yeah, and if they're right. Because cultures can be wrong, you know what I mean? Our culture could be wrong, Lakota could be wrong, Aboriginals could be wrong, Irish are wrong, Italians are wrong, Chinese are wrong. And so we don't know. I mean, so this is why we have to have the conversations and start, as we so often do, from some level of ignorance. Yay!
May we always be admitting our ignorance on this
Yes.
show through the lens of curiosity. And so I'm going to say cultural appropriation is not appropriate because of the way I hold that term, but cultural fusion and sharing.
No, that's criminal. What a criminal enterprise. You literally said cultural appropriation and then it froze. So now we're left with permanent ellipses.
Oh, whoops. I said cultural appropriation is not appropriate based on the way I hold that term, which I associate more with like that assimilation piece.
Yeah.
But cultural sharing and fusion and borrowing is one of the most natural ways of being human.
Yeah. And I will say, is cultural appropriation appropriate? I will say yes. And also no. Yeah.
Oh, that could be every answer. All right.
I know, a lot of times. All right, man. Love you.
All right. Love you. See you soon. Bye.